I'm Jaron O'Driscoll, and this is the Alma 230 Project. Put off the natural man, arise from the dust, and fulfill the measure of your creation. Today, guys, we are going to be talking about a topic that I've been thinking about, learned about fairly recently, and wanted to share with you guys. And this is the 3 moral ethics. Now, some of you may have already heard of this or learned about this, know about this. But basically what it is there are 3 societal moral ethics that people tend to lean towards or gravitate towards some more than others. They are the ethic of autonomy, the ethic of community, and the ethic of divinity. And you got to think of all of these as points on a triangle. If you gravitate any way towards that far corner of one, you go way far away from the other two, and you create a real problem. Now, if we go down the road of autonomy, the ethic of autonomy, that's something that's very strong in the United States. Freedom, liberty. We were born on this, making our own way, fleeing the oppression of a tyrant so that we could have our religious freedom and move more towards that, the ethic of autonomy and the ethic of divinity. And our nation here in the United States was born on this, on self-reliance, self-sufficiency, and making your own way in life and taking responsibility for yourself and your actions and doing whatever you can to make a better life for yourself and your family. Now, when this goes too far, I have experience with this, I've told my story about this. When you go too far and you get that dot all the way up into the one corner of autonomy, the ethic of autonomy, that's where anarchism lives. This is the idea that, everything is up to me. I don't need anything or anybody else. And that goes to a very, large extreme when you take it all the way down that path as far as you can go with that ethic of autonomy without the other two to balance it out. And we've gone so far, and technology has come so far, that it's allowed us this ability to seek after convenience to such a level that we can tune out everybody and everything around us. And we feel like we don't need anybody. We don't need community. We don't need God. We don't need anything, because all we care about and focused on is, whatever is going to be most convenient and make my life the easiest. Technology has done a lot of great things, but it's also made us dependent in ways that I think can also, or has also for a lot of people, drawn us away from those other 2 ethics. Where we once were escaping from oppression and we're seeking freedom from oppression, now we're seeking freedom from responsibility. And that's so that we can make life easier. And this is some of the far extreme stuff that happens when that freedom of autonomy goes all the way one way without anything to check it or to help balance it out. Now, speaking of the responsibility, if we go into the ethic of community and we go all the way down that road as hard as we can, that's where we get into communism, and where Satan uses this tool, just like he did in the War in Heaven, where we remove that responsibility again. Instead of us trying to give it up to make life easier, we have someone trying to eliminate it for us on our behalf. And that way, everything is fair. Everybody gets a chance, or not a chance, sorry. Everybody is even and equal. Nobody is, left behind. Nobody has less or more than anybody else. And it's all about the community. And we make it very much about the community in a negative way. And this is where false compassion breeds and lives, where everything we can justify in communism, taking from other people and doing all these things because we don't have the divinity there, we now have all of these ideals that are not in place that allow for a tyrant to come in and be the new God and basically take that role of divinity. And the natural man in us can see that as appealing. Like, I don't need to do anything. Someone else will take care of me. I don't need to worry about having the things that I need. There's ways that plays to the natural man in some people. The same way that the freedom and autonomy, can be taken to an extreme and used for bad, and how that can be a vice for people as well. Now, without the divinity aspect, either one of those two go to those directions. They go out of control and they go down dark paths, and we don't have a way to actually make them work to where everybody has the community that they need and the autonomy that they need. And these two roads we go down when divinity is not in the picture, when there is nothing to put a check on those things, to help us understand that we need each other and we also need to be reliant on ourselves. And there's a balance there that we can't really get without the divinity. Those two things are always just butting heads, the community side or the autonomy side. They're just always butting heads. I mean, is it any wonder why we have two major parties here in the United States, and they tend to gravitate each one to those two ethics, one of autonomy and one of community, though they are both, especially the community side, very bastardized and taken advantage of. Now, the other side, the autonomy side as well. And those two things are always butting heads in the political realm. It's very, very plain to see that. The way to balance this out, in my opinion, is having the gospel, having that divinity, right? We have to have that ethic of divinity in our life, because that guides us, especially, we're talking here about the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. If we have this in our lives, those principles and teachings that we have from the gospel help us understand that we need to be reliant on ourselves. We need to have self-reliance, but it's not just so that we can do everything on our own and just prove ourselves to return to our Father in heaven. That is part of it, but it's also about being part of a community to help do things and to move things forward, to help other people around us and play our role and play a part in a bigger picture in God's plan. Because if we just go with divinity and go hardcore into that, we can get, some extreme things as well. To where, in the church, we sometimes, if we're just focusing on, we're just going through the motions, right? Doing our calling and going to church every Sunday, but then we're not really applying anything. We're just kind of going through the motions. When we don't have an actual good community or trying to participate in our ward to have, build community, or trying to build self-reliance and self-sufficiency in our life. So it can go to an extreme that way as well. But if we only pair that, and we have the gospel, right? And if we only pair that with the autonomy side, looking at what's going on in the world today and seeing what's happening with the last days, this is where people get the idea, leaving out the community side, because they don't have the community side of it, thinking, I'm just going to go and buy a pallet of MREs and a pallet of 5.56 NATO, and I'm going to go live out in the middle of nowhere on my own, away from everybody, and just wait for Christ to come. That's what happens when you leave out that community side and go all the way into the divinity side and the autonomy side. Now, if you go over into the divinity side with the community side and leave out the autonomy side, this is where I think you see things like what happened with the FLDS people with Warren Jeffs and all this crazy religious fanatic stuff, where they have these little communities that are turning into, little areas where tyranny can thrive and grow, and you have people that end up taking advantage of people because you don't have that freedom of autonomy to balance it out as well. So that balance and having, something somewhat centered in that triangle between those three is ideal. And I think people like the Mennonites, like the Amish, they're the ones off the top of my head I can really think of that I think do a pretty good job of this. They live longer, they live happy lives. There's a lot of data out there that shows that their way of life and the way they do things is a much better way to live. And I think they do a pretty decent job of balancing having divinity, having autonomy, and having community in their life. Why is it that us, those that have the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, don't have that same balance of all of these things? We lack the community a lot of times. I've experienced this. A lot of people are out there. A lot of people, maybe you listening, understand like what it's like to go to a ward that you don't like. I like church and I know the gospel is true, but a lot of people don't go a lot of times because I don't like my ward. The people are can be rude or mean, or they just don't, you're an outsider, they don't like you, or they just don't make an effort and you feel, like an outsider because nobody's making an effort because everyone's just doing their own thing. And then when we do have that community, it's like church stuff stays at church, but we don't have, like, how often do we get together for actual like gospel discussions? There are things going on where it's, not always the place where you want to bring up certain things when, in Sunday school or elders quorum or relief society. Like, why don't we talk about the gospel more and get together and have discussions? Whenever we do activities for young men, young women's, for Relief Society Sisters, for elders quorum, for young men, young women's, why is it always we're going to go bowling or we're going to go do all these activities and there's never a gospel? I mean, yes, we might sometimes have a 5-minute gospel lesson or something, and obviously open and close with a prayer. Like, it's not like it's just a bunch of friends getting together. Like, we have these activities, but why are we not having activities where we come together and have gospel discussions about things that are going on in our lives, how the gospel can apply to our lives, about the things we care about, the things we're worried about, things we're concerned about, things we're struggling with? Why aren't we intermingling those and making all of these ethics together, bring them together? It's like they're all in their own little worlds. Like, we don't meld these things together. They just stay in their own little place, and we won't bring them together, and we won't have all of these things all in one place at one time. Why are we keeping these things so separate? Now, in the United States, I think a lot of this is because we have gone, a little further down that road towards autonomy, and people are worried about bothering other people, and they don't want to, intrude on people, or they think people won't like them, or they don't want to do that. And we, are so worried that we don't want to step on people's toes, or they're doing their own thing, I'm doing my own thing, I don't want to be intruded on, or I don't want to intrude on them. And I think that cultural aspect is something we got to come back off of. We moved to the South, and it is so different here. Like, we've been to a lot of different places, wards in Utah and Nevada, and they're all pretty good. Some are better than others, but there's something different here on the community aspect of it. The community side here is so much different. And yes, the autonomy side's here, but at least in Utah, I think it's gone so far down that road of autonomy being, where everything's headquartered there, where everything is accumulated for the general membership of the church, that things have been most extreme on that autonomy side, and nobody wants to step on toes and impose and intrude on anybody. And that's something, like, I wish people would just come over. I wish when I was in Utah, I had people that would just come and knock on the door unannounced and come talk to me and come see me. Like, that kind of stuff never happened. Like, people want that community. Everybody's craving community. That's why there's so many communities online popping up that everybody's wanting to be a part of. There's always an influencer, somebody that's starting a community that people are coming together and want to be a part of, because people are craving that community. And we need that as members of the church. We've got to have that part of it to round everything out. We aren't going to be able to go through what's coming in the last days if we don't have each other to rely on, and we don't have those relationships built. We've got to have that autonomy part as well, and have something that we're producing that we can contribute to that as well, so that we're not being a drain on people, but we can actually contribute and do something for other people as well. And we got to not be afraid to add the gospel into these things, and not be afraid to look at everything through that lens. Why are we doing this for freedom? Why do we care about the freedom and the autonomy so much? The gospel is why, and gives us that from the war in heaven. And our purpose here, the plan of salvation, everything can be tied to that. Why don't we do that up front more? Why are we keeping that separate? Why aren't we talking about these things through that divinity lens? We need to stop keeping this stuff separate and understand that everything comes through that divinity side. That everything is justified through the divinity side. Now, what's the answer to how we do that? I don't know. That's something I'm still trying to figure out myself, but I think we need to find ways that we can do that. Get together with people and talk about the future and the gospel and how it's applying in our lives individually, and how it can apply to what we're trying to do with our purpose, and how we're trying to be autonomous and create community, create self-reliance in our lives and community, and do both of those things, and how the gospel justifies it. We think we need to have a lot more of those discussions and not be afraid to meld those three things together and understand that all three of them are important. And that's all I have for you for this one, folks. Let me know, where do you think we're lacking the most? Which one of these ethics have you seen as a member of the church in your life? Where are you at, and where have you seen the most lack in these three moral ethics? I want to hear from you guys so we can come together and try and figure out a solution to this stuff. And until the next episode, remember, be an instrument in God's hands.